Sometimes, the courtroom is where broken lives collide with the law. But sometimes, just sometimes, it's where broken families find their way back to each other. This is a story about Sarah Chen, a woman who thought she'd lost everything: her marriage, her dignity, her family, and nearly her faith in the world. It's about her husband Marcus, a man so drunk on power that he forgot cruelty has consequences. And it's about Daniel Chen, a judge who built a successful career while the distance between him and his little sister grew into a chasm neither knew how to cross. What you're about to read explores the devastating loneliness of betrayal when you have no one to turn to, the guilt of family members who drift apart even when they still love each other, the moment when power meets its match in the form of genuine justice, and ultimately, the hard, painful, beautiful work of rebuilding the bonds we thought were broken forever. This isn't just a story about a villain getting what he deserves in court. It's about two siblings who lost each other in the noise of life, and how the worst moment of one's life became the catalyst for both of them to find their way home. There will be moments that hurt, the cruelty of people who should protect us, the isolation of facing our darkest hours alone, the regret of words left unsaid and calls never made. But there will also be catharsis, the fierce love of family that never truly dies, and the hope that it's never too late to show up for the people we love. So settle in. This is the story of Sarah and Daniel Chen, and the day everything changed in Courtroom 7. If this story touches you, I hope you'll share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes we all need to be reminded that family can find its way back, and that justice, when it comes, can heal more than we ever imagined. I promise, Sarah. I promise I'll never leave you. Daniel Chen was 19 years old when he made that promise, standing in a cemetery in the rain, holding his 12-year-old sister as she sobbed into his jacket. Their parents had been gone for 3 days, a drunk driver, a rainy night, a phone call that shattered everything. Sarah looked up at him with those huge, dark eyes, red from crying. "Don't leave me, Danny. Everyone leaves." He'd knelt down, taken her face in his hands. "Not me. Never me. I've got you, baby sister. Always." And for a while, he kept that promise. He dropped out of college, worked 3 jobs, made sure she had everything she needed. He helped with homework at midnight after his shift at the warehouse. He learned to braid her hair from YouTube videos. He scared off her first terrible boyfriend. He was there. But then life happened. Law school happened. Career opportunities 3 states away happened. Important cases and long hours and networking events happened. Phone calls became shorter, less frequent. Visits turned into holidays only, then just Christmas, then maybe not even that. 10 years later, they were strangers who shared blood and a childhood that felt like a lifetime ago. Daniel had told himself Sarah was fine. She'd gotten married, moved on with her life. She didn't need her big brother anymore. He was wrong. He was about to find out just how wrong. Sarah Chen stood in her master bedroom, staring at the red lace lingerie in her hands. Size 2. She was a size 8 on her best day, and that was before the pregnancy. 6 months pregnant, and her husband had bought lingerie for someone else. Her hands shook as she placed the evidence back in Marcus's drawer, exactly where she'd found it. Her mind raced through explanations, justifications, anything but the obvious truth. Maybe it was for her. A surprise gift he'd misjudged the size on. Maybe. Sarah. She spun around. Marcus stood in the doorway, still in his tailored suit from work, his expression unreadable. I was just putting away laundry, Anne. Found Vanessa's things. He said it so casually, like he was commenting on the weather. Sarah felt the room tilt. Vanessa? Your assistant Vanessa. Marcus loosened his tie, walking past her to his closet. Don't be dramatic. You knew this marriage was a business arrangement from the start. Business arrangement? Her voice came out small, broken. Marcus, I'm carrying your child. He turned, and the coldness in his eyes made her stomach drop. This wasn't the man she'd married 5 years ago. Or maybe it was, and she'd just been too in love to see it. A mistake we can remedy after the divorce, he said. My lawyer will contact you tomorrow. I'm being generous with the settlement. You should take it. Generous? Tears were streaming down her face now. She placed a hand protectively over her belly. This is your baby. Our baby. That's up for debate. He pulled out a suitcase and began packing. Vanessa's waiting for me at the penthouse. I'll have the rest of my things collected next week. Don't make this difficult, Sarah. You have no leverage here. Leverage? She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Marcus, we took vows. We're having a child together. Doesn't that mean anything to you? He paused, looking at her with something close to pity. You gave up your teaching job. You have no income, no career, no support system. That brother of yours who practically raised you. When's the last time you even spoke to him? 3 years ago. 4. The words hit like a physical blow. He was right. Daniel had called on her birthday last year, and she'd let it go to voicemail. Too much water under the bridge, too much distance, too much hurt from feeling forgotten. You're nothing without me, Marcus continued, zipping his suitcase. And the sooner you accept that, the easier this will be. Sign the papers, take the money, and move on. After he left, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed for hours, one hand on her swelling belly, the other clutching her phone. She pulled up Daniel's contact. Her finger hovered over the call button. 3 years of silence. 3 years of growing apart. 3 years of telling herself she didn't need anyone. The phone rang once before she panicked and hung up. Too proud. Too ashamed. Too afraid he wouldn't answer, or worse, that he would and she'd hear the distance in his voice. She was alone. Completely, utterly alone. She curled up on the bed and cried until there were no tears left. The next morning, Marcus's lawyer delivered the divorce papers. The settlement was insulting, enough to live on for maybe 6 months if she was careful, and sole custody wasn't even discussed. It was assumed she'd get it, but with minimal child support. Marcus was using his wealth and connections to make sure she'd struggle. 2 weeks later, Sarah sat in a corner booth at a diner, across from Janet Miller, the only lawyer she could afford. Janet was young, fresh out of law school, working out of a shared office space. She meant well, but Sarah could see the worry in her eyes as she reviewed the case. Sarah, I'm going to be honest with you, Janet said, pushing her glasses up her nose. Marcus has Klein and Associates representing him. They're one of the top firms in the state. They're going to come at you hard. Paint you as unstable, unemployed, unable to provide. But I only stopped working because Marcus wanted me to focus on the home. He said. I know. And we'll argue that. But without documentation, without witnesses, it's your word against his. Janet's expression was sympathetic. Do you have anyone who can testify on your behalf? Character witnesses? Family? Sarah stared at her coffee. No. No one. The preliminary hearing was set for 3 weeks later. 3 weeks that Sarah spent in a fog of anxiety and morning sickness, living in a studio apartment she could barely afford, eating ramen and trying not to think about the future. The night before the hearing, she pulled up Daniel's contact again. This time she typed out a message, Danny, I need you. But she didn't send it. What would she even say? That she'd ignored him for years and now needed him to rescue her. That she'd married a man who turned out to be a monster and had no one else to turn to. She deleted the message and cried herself to sleep. The morning of the hearing, Sarah stood in front of her bathroom mirror, trying to make herself presentable. Her maternity dress was simple, modest, the best she could afford. Her face was pale, dark circles under her eyes from weeks of poor sleep. She looked exactly like what Marcus's lawyers would paint her as, desperate, broken, pathetic. The courthouse was enormous, all marble and echoing footsteps. Sarah clutched her purse and followed Janet through security, feeling smaller with every step. They passed other people with their lawyers, their families, their support systems. Sarah had Janet, who was sweet but inexperienced, and nobody else. "The hearing is in courtroom 7, Janet said, checking her phone. "We're early." "That's good. We can prepare." They walked down a long hallway, and that's when Sarah saw them. Marcus and Vanessa, standing near the courtroom entrance, laughing. Actually laughing. Vanessa was wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than Sarah's entire month's rent, her hand possessively on Marcus's arm. She was beautiful, young, everything Sarah felt she wasn't anymore. Marcus saw Sarah and his expression didn't change. No guilt, no remorse, nothing. He whispered something to Vanessa, who turned and looked at Sarah with undisguised contempt. Sarah tried to walk past them with her head high, but her hands were shaking. "Oh God, Marcus, is that what she's wearing?" Vanessa's voice carried down the hallway, meant to be heard. "I mean, I know she's broke now, but really?" Janet touched Sarah's arm. "Ignore them. Just keep walking." But Marcus's voice followed them. "Sarah." She stopped despite herself. "Last chance to be reasonable. Sign the settlement, walk away with something. Drag this out, and I promise you'll get nothing." Sarah turned slowly. For a moment, she wanted to scream at him, to ask how he could be so cruel to the woman carrying his child. But the words wouldn't come. She just stood there, feeling the baby move inside her, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. "That's what I thought," Marcus said, turning back to Vanessa. "This'll be over in 20 minutes. Inside the courtroom, Sarah sat at the respondents' table, Janet beside her organizing papers with nervous energy. Across the aisle, Marcus sat with his team of 3 lawyers, all in expensive suits, all looking confident and relaxed. Behind him, Vanessa sat in the gallery, scrolling through her phone like she was waiting for a movie to start. Sarah placed her hand on her belly, feeling the baby kick. "It's just us, baby," she whispered. "It's always been just us." A memory flashed through her mind, young Daniel holding her hand at their parents' funeral, his voice breaking as he promised, "I'll never leave you." But he had. Everyone had. And now she was here, alone, about to lose everything. "All rise." The bailiff's voice echoed through the courtroom. Everyone stood. Sarah's legs felt weak, but she forced herself upright, one hand steadying herself on the table. The Honorable Judge Daniel Chen presiding. Sarah looked up at the bench, and her entire world stopped. Daniel. Her brother. Her Danny, who she hadn't seen in 3 years, walked into the courtroom in judge's robes, carrying files, his expression professional and composed. He was older now, his hair touched with gray at the temples, lines around his eyes she didn't remember. But it was him. It was really him. Their eyes met across the courtroom. Sarah watched as recognition dawned on his face, watched his professional mask crack for just a fraction of a second. His eyes widened, his lips parted slightly, and unless she was imagining it, she saw his hand grip the edge of the bench a little too tightly. "Danny," she mouthed, not making a sound. Tears were already forming in her eyes. Daniel looked away quickly, settling into his seat, opening the case file with hands that Sarah noticed were trembling slightly. He cleared his throat. "Please be seated. We're here today for the preliminary hearing in the matter of Chen vs. Chen, case number 2024, DR 8847. Petitioner is represented by Klein and Associates. Respondent by," he paused, checking the file. "Janet Miller, solo practitioner." His voice was steady, professional, but Sarah could hear something underneath it. Pain. Shock. She couldn't tell. She realized she didn't know her brother's voice anymore. Not really. Marcus's lead attorney, Richard Klein himself, stood up. He was in his 60s, silver-haired, with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a case he cared about winning. Your Honor, this should be a straightforward matter. My client, Marcus Chin, CEO of Chin Industries, is seeking a dissolution of marriage with fair and reasonable terms. The respondent, unfortunately, has refused to cooperate, necessitating this hearing. Janet stood up, her voice less steady but determined. Your Honor, my client has refused to sign an unfair settlement that leaves her with inadequate support while 6 months pregnant with the petitioner's child. Allegedly pregnant with my client's child, Klein interjected smoothly. We have reason to believe. Mr. Klein. Daniel's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. The respondent is visibly pregnant. Unless you have actual evidence to present regarding paternity, I suggest you refrain from insinuations. Sarah saw Marcus lean over to whisper to Klein, looking annoyed. Vanessa shifted in her seat, clearly bored. The hearing proceeded with the cold efficiency of legal proceedings. Klein presented Marcus's case, that Sarah had been provided for generously during the marriage, that she had chosen to leave her employment, that Marcus was willing to offer fair support but that Sarah was being unreasonable in her demands. When Janet tried to present Sarah's side, the emotional abuse, the isolation, Marcus's controlling behavior, Klein objected at every turn. Daniel sustained most of them. The law was the law, and without documentation, Sarah's pain was just words. Sarah watched her brother, hoping for some sign of recognition, some indication that he was on her side. But he remained impartial, professional, distant. Just like he'd been for the past 3 years. Maybe longer. Your Honor, Janet said, her voice gaining strength, my client gave up her career, her independence, at her husband's insistence. She has no family support. Because she drove them away, Klein interrupted. The respondent has isolated herself through her own choices. The words hit Sarah like a slap. She saw Daniel's jaw clench, but he said nothing. Janet continued, she's 6 months pregnant and has been subjected to emotional abuse and manipulation. Objection. Speculation without evidence. Sustained. Sarah felt herself shrinking in her chair. This was hopeless. Even with Daniel on the bench, especially with Daniel on the bench, having to remain impartial, she was going to lose. The baby kicked hard, as if sensing her distress, and Sarah put both hands on her belly, trying to breathe. Ms. Miller, Daniel said, his voice softer now, does your client wish to make a statement? Janet looked at Sarah, who shook her head. What could she say? That she was scared? That she was alone? That her brother was sitting right there and she wanted to scream at him for leaving her, for letting her face this alone? No, Your Honor, Janet said. Daniel nodded slowly. He looked at Sarah for a long moment, and she thought she saw something in his eyes, regret. Sorrow. Then he looked away. We'll take a brief recess. 15 minutes. The gavel came down, and everyone stood. Daniel left through the door behind the bench. Sarah watched him go, feeling something break inside her chest. He was here. He was right here. And still, she was alone. In the hallway during the recess, Sarah found a bench away from everyone and sat down heavily, her hands on her belly, trying not to cry. Janet had gone to make some calls, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. That's when she heard the voice. Oh my God, is she crying again? Vanessa's voice, dripping with contempt. Marcus, seriously, how did you stand 5 years of this? Sarah didn't look up. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. She's pathetic, Vanessa continued, loud enough to be heard clearly. I mean, look at her. Knocked up, broke, sitting there feeling sorry for herself. Some women just can't handle life without a man to take care of them. Vanessa, that's enough, Marcus said, but he was smiling. Sarah could hear it in his voice. What? I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. She had a good thing and couldn't keep it together. Now she's going to pop out a kid she can't afford and play the victim for the rest of her life. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. The baby kicked again, harder this time. She took a deep breath, willing herself to stay calm, to not engage, to just get through this. Careful, Marcus said, his voice closer now. We don't want her going into early labor before the judge makes his ruling. That would be inconvenient. They laughed. Actually laughed. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, but she kept her head down, kept her hands on her baby, and thought about Daniel. About the brother who used to protect her from everything. About the man who had promised never to leave. Janet returned just as the bailiff called everyone back into the courtroom. Sarah stood up, wiped her face, and walked back in with her head as high as she could manage. Daniel returned to the bench, his expression carefully neutral. The hearing resumed. Klein presented documents about Marcus's income, his proposed child support, an amount that was technically legal but nowhere near sufficient given his actual wealth. He presented character witnesses by deposition, colleagues who spoke of Marcus's professionalism and generosity. Sarah had no witnesses. No proof of the emotional abuse. No documentation of Marcus's demands that she quit her job. Just her word, and as Klein pointed out repeatedly, she had every reason to lie. Your Honor, Klein said, standing with practiced ease, my client is willing to be reasonable. But the respondent's unrealistic expectations and refusal to cooperate have made this necessary. We request that the court establish temporary support at the amount proposed in our filing, with sole custody to the respondent but with paternity testing required before final support amounts are determined. Sarah felt sick. Paternity testing. As if she would lie about who the father was. As if she'd ever been with anyone but Marcus. Janet stood to object, but before she could speak, Vanessa's voice cut through the courtroom. Oh, for God's sake, this is taking forever. Everyone turned. Vanessa was standing in the gallery, looking annoyed. Marcus grabbed her arm, trying to pull her back down, but she shook him off. Vanessa, sit down, Marcus hissed. No. I'm sorry, but this is ridiculous. She's dragging this out to punish you. Everyone can see it. Ma'am, Daniel's voice was controlled but hard, you need to sit down and be quiet, or I'll have you removed from my courtroom. Vanessa looked at Daniel, and Sarah saw the exact moment when her arrogance overrode her common sense. With all due respect, Your Honor, we all know how this is going to end. She's going to get her child support, we're going to move on with our lives, and she's going to spend the next 18 years playing the victim. Can we just speed this up? Ma'am, this is your final warning. Marcus was pulling at Vanessa's arm now, his face red. But the damage was done. The contempt, the arrogance, it was all on display. Whatever, Vanessa said, finally sitting down. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Daniel's eyes were cold. Mr. Klein, I suggest you have a conversation with the guests in your gallery about courtroom decorum. Yes, Your Honor. My apologies. The hearing dragged on. Janet did her best, but Sarah could see they were losing. Every objection sustained, every piece of evidence dismissed. When it came time for Sarah to answer questions, her voice came out weak, shaky. Ms. Chen, Klein said, his tone almost gentle, which somehow made it worse, you claim you were coerced into leaving your job. But you signed the resignation letter yourself, did you not? Yes, but Marcus said. Did anyone force you to sign it? No, but. Did anyone threaten you? Not explicitly, but. So you made a choice. An adult choice. And now you regret it. Sarah felt tears building again. She looked at Janet, who looked helpless. She looked at Daniel, who was writing something down, his face unreadable. I thought, Sarah's voice broke. I thought we were building a life together. I thought. Your Honor, the respondent's feelings, while unfortunate, are not relevant to the legal matter at hand. Sustained. Sarah felt like she was drowning. Every time she tried to explain, to make them understand, she was shut down. Marcus sat there looking smug. Vanessa kept checking her phone. And Daniel, her brother, the person who had promised to always protect her, just sat there following the law. The questioning continued. How much money did she have saved? None. What family support did she have? None. What job prospects? None. Where was she living? A studio apartment in a bad neighborhood. Did she have a car? No. Had she made any effort to find employment while pregnant? No, because she'd been dealing with severe morning sickness and high-risk pregnancy complications. With every answer, Sarah felt herself being painted as incompetent, irresponsible, a burden. And maybe she was. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe she was nothing without him. Your Honor, Klein said, sensing victory, I think we've established that while my client is willing to provide reasonable support, the respondent's situation is largely of her own making. We request the court establish temporary support at $2,000 per month pending paternity testing, with sole physical custody to the respondent. $2,000 a month. For a child. In a city where rent alone was $1,500 for a studio. Janet stood up. Your Honor, that amount is unconscionable given the petitioner's income of over $500,000 annually. The petitioner also has significant business expenses and obligations that he chose to take on. Your Honor. Enough. Daniel's voice cut through the arguing. He looked tired. I'll take this under advisement and issue a ruling. This is such bullshit. The voice was Vanessa's again. She was standing, and this time she was angry. Excuse me. Daniel's voice was ice. I said this is bullshit. Marcus is being more than fair, and she's sitting there crying like she's the victim. She chose this. She chose to be a housewife, she chose to have no career, she chose to have no friends or family. Those are her choices. Ma'am, sit down now, or you will be held in contempt. But Vanessa was on a roll, her voice rising. No. Someone needs to say it. She's a gold digger who got pregnant to trap a rich man, and now she's playing victim because it didn't work out. Look at her. She's pathetic. Sarah felt something inside her snap. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. How dare you? Sarah's voice was shaking but clear. You don't know anything about me. You don't know what I gave up, what you gave up. Vanessa laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. You gave up a mediocre teaching job to live in luxury for 5 years. Cry me a river. Marcus was pulling at Vanessa's arm, whispering urgently. Vanessa, stop. Not here. But Vanessa was beyond reason, her face flushed with anger. She walked toward Sarah, and Janet moved to intercept, but Vanessa pushed past her. You want to know what's pathetic? Vanessa was right in front of Sarah now, her voice venomous. You had a good thing. A rich husband, a nice life. And you couldn't keep him happy. That's on you. So don't stand there with your hand on your belly playing the victim when you're the one who failed. Bailiff. Daniel was on his feet. Remove that woman from my courtroom immediately. But it happened so fast. Vanessa's hand came up, and before anyone could react, she slapped Sarah across the face. The sound echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. Sarah stumbled back, her hand going to her cheek, shock and pain flooding through her. And then Marcus was there, his face contorted with rage, not at Vanessa, but at Sarah. You bitch, Marcus snarled. You made her do that. Standing there with your pathetic tears, making her look like the bad guy. And then Marcus's hand came up, and he slapped Sarah too, harder than Vanessa had, hard enough that Sarah lost her balance. She fell, her hands instinctively going to protect her belly as she hit the floor. The courtroom erupted. The bailiff was moving, Janet was screaming, people in the gallery were on their feet. But all Sarah could hear was her own heartbeat, all she could feel was her hands on her belly, frantically checking if the baby was okay. And then there was another sound. A roar of rage that didn't sound professional or measured or anything like a judge. It sounded like a brother who had just watched his sister get attacked. Bailiffs. Restrain them now. Sarah looked up through her tears and saw Daniel. He wasn't behind the bench anymore. He was coming down, his robes flying behind him, his face transformed by fury and anguish. Two bailiffs grabbed Marcus and Vanessa, pulling them away as they struggled. Get your hands off me! Marcus was shouting. Do you know who I am? I don't care if you're the president, one bailiff growled, forcing Marcus's arms behind his back. Daniel was kneeling beside Sarah now, his hands hovering over her, not quite touching, his voice breaking. Sarah. Sarah, look at me. Are you hurt? The baby? Sarah looked up at her brother, and for the first time in 3 years, she really saw him. Not the successful judge, not the distant stranger, but Danny. Her Danny who had held her through nightmares and made her breakfast before school and promised never to leave. Danny, she whispered, and her voice broke completely. You came. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't there sooner. I'm here now. I'm here. He helped her sit up carefully, his hands gentle, his entire body shaking with barely controlled rage and grief. Janet was there too, checking Sarah over, asking if she needed an ambulance. The baby's moving, Sarah said, her hands on her belly. I can feel the baby. I think we're okay. Daniel exhaled shakily. Thank God. Thank God. He looked up at the bailiffs holding Marcus and Vanessa, and the fury in his eyes was terrifying. Cuff them both, he said, his voice like gravel. Criminal assault on a pregnant woman in my courtroom. They're both under arrest. You can't do this. Vanessa was shrieking. We barely touched her. She's fine. You assaulted a 6-month pregnant woman in front of a dozen witnesses, Daniel said, standing slowly. You're going to jail. Both of you. Marcus had gone pale. Your Honor, in the heat of the moment, I didn't mean. You didn't mean to assault the mother of your child in front of a judge. Mr. Chen, I suggest you stop talking before you make this worse for yourself. Daniel helped Sarah into a chair, making sure she was steady before he turned back to the room. His face was still wet with tears, but his voice was pure steel. This court is in recess. Bailiffs, take them both into custody. I want charges filed immediately, assault on a pregnant woman, contempt of court, and anything else that applies. This is insane. Marcus was struggling against the bailiff's grip. You can't. I can and I will. Your lawyer can explain your rights to you on the way to booking. Klein stepped forward, his face carefully neutral. Your Honor, with all due respect, there may be a conflict of interest here that. Daniel turned to him, and whatever Klein saw in his eyes made him stop talking. Mr. Klein, are you suggesting I didn't just witness your client and his mistress assault a pregnant woman in my courtroom? No, Your Honor, but. Then there's no conflict. There are facts. 2 people committed assault in front of me and a room full of witnesses. They will be charged accordingly. Daniel paused, taking a breath. And yes, Mr. Klein, I am going to recuse myself from the divorce proceedings. The respondent is my sister. My little sister, who I failed to protect for far too long. The courtroom went silent. Sarah felt every eye turn to her. However, Daniel continued, his voice thick with emotion, before I recuse myself, I'm going to issue an emergency order. Ms. Sarah Chen is granted an emergency protective order against both Marcus Chen and Vanessa Brooks. They are not to come within 500 feet of her. Additionally, I'm freezing all marital assets pending proper review by another judge. Mr. Chen's attempt to hide assets and lowball support while assaulting the mother of his child has shown me exactly what kind of man he is. Your Honor, you can't, Klein started. I can and I just did. You can appeal it. Good luck with that. Daniel looked at Marcus, who was being hauled toward the door. Mr. Chen, you said my sister has nobody. You were wrong. She has me. And you're going to learn what it means to have nothing. The bailiffs dragged Marcus and Vanessa out, their protests fading down the hallway. Daniel turned back to Sarah, and suddenly he wasn't a judge anymore. He was just her big brother, and he looked like his heart was breaking. Sarah, his voice failed. He tried again. I should have been there. I should have called more, visited more. I should have known you needed me. Sarah stood up shakily. They faced each other across 3 years of silence, 3 years of missed calls and unsent messages, 3 years of growing apart while both of them ached for connection. I didn't call you either, Sarah whispered. I was too proud. Too hurt. I thought you'd forgotten about me. Never. Daniel's voice broke. Never, Sarah. I thought about you every day. I didn't know how to bridge the gap anymore. And I was a coward. They stood there for a moment longer, and then Sarah took a step forward. And then another. And then she was in her brother's arms, and she was sobbing, great, heaving sobs that shook her whole body. Daniel held her tight, one hand cradling the back of her head like he used to when she was little, the other arm around her shoulders. I've got you, he whispered into her hair, his own tears falling. I've got you, baby sister. I'm not leaving again. I promise. I promise. I needed you, Danny, Sarah cried into his chest. I needed you so much. I know. I'm here now. I'm here. They stood there while the courtroom emptied around them, while Janet quietly gathered papers, while the weight of 3 years of separation began to lift. They stood there and held each other and cried for everything they'd lost and everything they'd found again. Finally, Sarah pulled back enough to look up at her brother. What happens now? Daniel wiped his eyes, trying to compose himself. Now I recuse myself formally from your case. Another judge will handle the divorce. But Marcus is going to jail, at least overnight. And when he gets out, he's going to find that assaulting you in front of witnesses was the biggest mistake of his life. He'll get good lawyers. He always does. So will you. Daniel took her hand. Sarah, I know we have a lot to talk about. A lot to work through. But right now, I need to know, are you safe? Where are you staying? Sarah told him about the studio apartment, the barely functioning heat, the neighborhood where she heard sirens every night. With every detail, she watched Daniel's jaw tighten. No, he said finally. Absolutely not. You're coming home with me. Danny, I can't just. You can and you will. I have a guest room. It's yours. We'll figure out the rest later. Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to maintain some shred of independence. But she was tired. So tired. And the idea of not being alone, of having family again, was overwhelming. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Daniel squeezed her hand. Let's get you checked out by a doctor first. Make sure you and the baby are really okay. Then we'll go home. As they walked out of the courtroom together, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in years, hope. The road ahead was still hard. The divorce would still be messy. Marcus would still try to fight. But she wasn't alone anymore. She had her brother back. And that changed everything. 3 months later, Sarah woke up in the middle of the night in Daniel's guest room, which had become her room. A sharp pain rippled through her abdomen, and she gasped, one hand going to her belly. Oh no, she whispered. Not yet. Please, not yet. But another contraction came, stronger this time, and Sarah knew. This was it. She was having her baby. She grabbed her phone and called Daniel. He answered on the first ring, his voice immediately alert. Sarah? What's wrong? It's time, she said, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. Danny, the baby's coming. She heard movement, heard him getting out of bed. I'm coming. 2 minutes. Breathe, Sarah. Remember the breathing we practiced. They'd practiced. Over the past 3 months, Daniel had been to every doctor's appointment, every prenatal class. He'd been the one to help her pick out baby clothes, to put together the crib, to paint the nursery a soft yellow. He'd been there for everything. True to his word, Daniel was at her door in under 2 minutes, already dressed, car keys in hand. How far apart are the contractions? About 8 minutes. Okay. We've got time. Let's get you to the hospital. The drive was a blur of pain and breathing exercises and Daniel's steady voice talking her through it. He held her hand at every red light, kept telling her she was doing great, that she was strong, that everything would be okay. At the hospital, they were rushed into a delivery room. The doctor checked her and announced she was already 6 centimeters dilated. Things were moving fast. Do you want me to call anyone? Daniel asked, holding her hand as another contraction hit. The father should. No, Sarah's voice was firm despite the pain. Marcus gave up that right. You're the only family I need here. Daniel's eyes filled with tears, but he nodded. Okay. I'm not going anywhere. The labor was long and hard. 16 hours of pain, of fear, of Daniel never leaving her side. He held her hand until her grip left marks. He wiped her forehead with cool cloths. He told her stories about when they were kids to distract her from the pain. He told her how proud he was of her, how strong she was, how much their parents would have loved to see this moment. And when the doctor finally said, "One more push, Sarah," and Daniel squeezed her hand and said, "You've got this, baby sister," Sarah pushed with everything she had. The baby's cry filled the room, and Sarah burst into tears. It's a girl, the doctor announced. A healthy baby girl. They placed the baby on Sarah's chest, and Sarah looked down at her daughter, tiny, perfect, screaming her outrage at the world. Dark hair, Sarah's nose, and when the baby opened her eyes, they were the same dark brown as the Chen family. "Hi, sweetheart," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Hi, baby girl. I'm your mama. And this is your Uncle Danny, who's going to love you so much." Daniel was crying too, looking at his niece with wonder. "She's perfect. Sarah, she's absolutely perfect." The nurse came over. "Dad, would you like to cut the cord?" "Oh, I'm not. He's not the father," Sarah said firmly. "He's the uncle. The best uncle in the world." The nurse smiled. "Would Uncle like to cut the cord then?" Daniel looked at Sarah, who nodded. With shaking hands, he cut the cord, officially separating Sarah from the baby who would now be her whole world. After they'd cleaned and weighed the baby, after they'd checked her over and declared her perfectly healthy at 7 pounds, 3 ounces, they brought her back wrapped in a soft pink blanket. "Does she have a name?" the nurse asked. Sarah looked down at her daughter, then up at her brother. "Hope," she said softly. "Her name is Hope Diana Chen." Daniel's middle name was David, and their mother's name had been Diana. He covered his mouth with his hand, fresh tears spilling over. "Sarah. You gave me hope when I had none," Sarah said. "You came back when I needed you most. It feels right." The nurse left them alone. Daniel sat in the chair beside Sarah's bed, and Sarah carefully transferred Hope into his arms. He held his niece like she was made of glass, looking down at her with absolute devotion. "Hi, Hope," he whispered. "I'm your Uncle Danny. And I promise you something, sweet girl. I'm going to be here for you and your mama. Every birthday, every scraped knee, every school play, every moment that matters. I'm never going to let you wonder if you're loved. You're going to know it every single day. Hope yawned, her tiny hand wrapping around Daniel's finger. I think she's got you wrapped around her finger already, Sarah said, smiling through her tears. Completely, Daniel agreed. He looked up at Sarah. Thank you. For letting me be here. For giving me a second chance. Thank you for showing up, Sarah said. For being the brother you always promised you'd be. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Hope sleep, until Sarah's eyes started to close from exhaustion. Get some rest, Daniel said softly. I'll hold her. I've got both of you. Sarah wanted to protest, but she was so tired. And she trusted him. Completely. Don't leave, she murmured, already half asleep. Never again, Daniel promised. Sarah drifted off to sleep with the sound of her brother humming softly to her daughter, and for the first time in years, she felt completely at peace. When she woke a few hours later, the first thing she saw was Daniel still in the chair, Hope asleep against his chest, his hand protectively cradling her tiny head. He looked tired but happy, and when he noticed Sarah was awake, he smiled. Hey, he said softly. How are you feeling? Sore. Exhausted. Happy. Sarah held out her arms, and Daniel carefully transferred Hope back to her. Has she been okay? Perfect. She woke up once, but I just talked to her and she went back to sleep. I think she likes her Uncle Danny. Of course she does. There was a knock at the door, and a nurse poked her head in. Sorry to interrupt, but we need to get some information for the birth certificate. Father's name? Sarah looked at the nurse steadily. No father listed. The nurse looked surprised but nodded. Okay. That's fine. An emergency contact. Daniel Chen, Sarah said, looking at her brother. He's my emergency contact. For everything. After the nurse left, Daniel took Sarah's hand. The divorce was finalized yesterday, he said gently. The judge awarded you sole physical custody with supervised visitation for Marcus if he completes anger management and parenting classes. Child support is set at $5,000 per month, and he has to contribute to Hope's college fund. He'll appeal. Let him. The assault charges stuck. He pled down to misdemeanor battery, but it's on his record. And the video from the courtroom has been seen by everyone who matters. His reputation is destroyed. The board of Chen Industries asked him to step down. Sarah absorbed this. She thought she'd feel triumphant, but she just felt sad. Sad that Hope would grow up knowing her father had chosen cruelty over love. Hey, Daniel said, reading her expression. She's going to be okay. She's going to be more than okay. Because she's going to have a mother who loves her, and an uncle who will always show up, and a family that's built on love instead of obligation. We're really doing this? Sarah asked. Raising her together. If you'll let me. Daniel squeezed her hand. I know I can't replace her father. But I can be here. I can help. I can love her like she's my own. Sarah looked at her brother, at the man who had kept his childhood promise after all, who had come back when it mattered most. I would love that, she said. Over the next few weeks, they settled into a rhythm. Sarah and Hope moved into Daniel's spare bedroom permanently. Daniel worked from home as much as possible, his office transformed into a space where he could help with nighttime feedings while reviewing case files. They took turns walking Hope when she was fussy. They learned together, how to change diapers efficiently, how to tell different types of cries apart, how to function on 3 hours of sleep. Sarah started going to therapy, working through the trauma of her marriage and the years of isolation. She joined a new mothers group at the community center. Slowly, carefully, she started building a life that was hers. Daniel cut back on his hours at work, turning down a promotion that would have meant more travel. When his colleagues asked why, he just said, "Family comes first now." One evening, when Hope was 2 months old, Sarah found Daniel in the nursery, holding his niece while she slept, just watching her. "You okay?" Sarah asked softly. Daniel looked up, and there were tears in his eyes. "I was just thinking about Mom and Dad. About how proud they'd be of you. Of how much they'd love Hope." Sarah came to stand beside him, looking down at her sleeping daughter. "I think about that too. I think they'd be proud of both of us. For finding our way back to each other. I wasted so much time," Daniel said, his voice thick. "So many years we could have had. We have now," Sarah said firmly. "We have today and tomorrow and all the days after. That's what matters." Daniel nodded, wiping his eyes. "You know what Mom used to say? Family isn't just blood. It's who shows up." "Then we're family," Sarah said. "Really, truly family." Hope stirred in Daniel's arms, her eyes opening. She looked up at her uncle and made a small cooing sound, her tiny fist waving. "Hi, sweet girl," Daniel whispered. "Did we wake you?" Sarah watched them together, her daughter and her brother, the family she'd thought she'd lost and found again. She thought about that day in the courtroom, about the moment when everything changed. About justice and mercy and second chances. "Hey Danny," she said softly. "Yeah. Thank you. For showing up. For keeping your promise, even if it took a while." Daniel looked at her, his eyes bright with love. "Thank you for letting me. For not giving up on us." They stood there together in the soft light of the nursery, the three of them, a family rebuilt from broken pieces. Outside, the world continued with all its complications and challenges. But here, in this moment, they had everything that mattered. They had each other. They had hope. They had home. And that was more than enough. That was everything. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with the family member you've lost touch with. Share it with the person facing their darkest hour alone. Share it with anyone who needs to be reminded that it's never too late to come back, to show up, to rebuild what was broken. Sometimes the greatest justice isn't what happens in a courtroom. Sometimes it's what happens when we find the courage to forgive, to reconnect, to choose love over pride. Sometimes it's learning that family isn't about being perfect, it's about being present. And if you're someone who needs help, who's facing a situation like Sarah's, please know, you don't have to face it alone. Reach out. Call that family member. Find your support system. There are people who will show up for you, just like Daniel showed up for Sarah. You deserve that. You deserve hope.